I'm a 50th anniversary lecturer in design at Lancaster University, and on the Livable Cities project I'm working as a researcher and co-investigator on Research Challenge 2, which is all about well-being.
So why are you doing work on well-being?
In 2008, the UK Government Office for Science published a report saying that all sectors of society, from education, work, government and governance, really needed to be focusing on the well-being of its citizens. And as part of that report, you and I actually published a chapter looking at the relationship between well-being and the physical environment. So that was really a starting place for us to look at how the urban environment impacts well-being. And for us, the urban environment really focused on two issues. One was on density, the other was on deprivation. By density, we're really talking about, in a sense, a crude measure of crowdedness in cities, so the built-up nature of places, the number of people or the number of houses in an area, and so on. And then when it comes to deprivation, we're looking at the conditions and the opportunities, or really the lack thereof, that occur in places where people live.
So what did you do?
So we basically did research in 4 different neighbourhood types, and they differ depending on their levels of density and their levels of deprivation. And the first one was a low density, low deprivation area, which you could be characterised by a place like Beverly Hills. We had a low density, high deprivation place that could be characterised by Detroit, or the inner city areas of Detroit. We had a high density, low deprivation area, which could be characterised by Bayswater in London. And then we looked at a high density, high deprivation place, which could be characterised by Victorian slums. I'd like to point out, of course, that we didn't look at actually these places, but we looked at indicative neighbourhoods in Lancaster, Southampton and Birmingham. So once we had those 4 neighbourhoods chosen, we went out and distributed well-being questionnaires to residents of those areas. And then we also audited the environmental quality of those neighbourhoods, looking particularly at walkability, because that's seen as a good indication of environmental quality within neighbourhoods.
So what were the results?
So we had 2 not so surprising results and 2 somewhat surprising results. So when we look at the not so surprising results, we found that the neighbourhoods typified by Beverly Hills were the ones that had the best well-being. So residents who lived there had the best well-being. And the area that actually did the best in terms of environmental quality or walkability was Bayswater. So those are the not so surprising results. We would expect to see that.
And what do you mean about the Bayswater? What was the characteristic of that Bayswater example that gave you that result that was not so surprising?
Well, the area itself is seen or characterised as high density and low deprivation. And so the very essence of a high density area means that it's probably going to be more walkable. That is, things are closer together, services, shops and so on. There's access to green space, there's connectivity to other places and so on.
And there's a sense of community.
And there's a sense of community, which definitely helps when it comes to walkability, yes.
And so what were the not so surprising results?
Yeah. So the not so surprising results really were, again, 2 of them. One was that the place that was just as walkable as Bayswater was actually the Victorian slum area. So it suggests that despite what we think about when it comes to high density and high deprivation, they're actually good places for walking around in. They may not be great places to live in, but they're good places for walking around in. And then the other finding that was somewhat surprising was actually the poorest performing neighbourhood, both in terms of well-being and in terms of walkability, was the area that was typified by the Detroit neighbourhood types.
And that's because they're low density, they don't have access to transport, and there isn't a sense of community.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
So what does this mean? What do we do with these findings?
So I think 2 things really. One is that as cities welcome more people every day and they become more dense, we really have to stop building the status quo, developing these low density, high deprivation neighbourhoods, because they're just not working. The second thing that we really need to do, though, is to be working in concert, in collaboration with each other. And so this ranges from all across different kinds of decision makers, from citizens to planners to developers, ecologists, engineers, and so on, to create a much more cohesive and joined-up approach as to what exactly these neighbourhoods should look like and what we can do to make them more livable both now and in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.